Not once, not twice, 17 times. Victoria Hart picked up the phone and called the people responsible for protecting her. 17 times. The system recorded it, categorized it, closed the file. She did not sit back and wait. She applied for a protection order, and she got one. She enrolled in VOGen, and her case was registered. She changed the locks. She installed cameras. She followed every single step that victims are told to follow. She missed none of them. On 29 September 2021, Rueda entered the house. No one stopped him. 3 children were inside. Her 1-year-old son ran outside. Not because anyone told him to, but because there was no one else left who could do it. Dad killed Mum 17 times, and she still died alone. Before we talk about what happened to her, let's talk about who she was. Victoria Hart was born and raised in England. She was not the kind of person who sat still, not the kind of person who simply accepted things. She chose to build a life for herself in Spain. A new country, a new language, a new life she built from the ground up with her own hands. She had 3 children, not 3 children as a number in a case file. 3 children she took to school every morning, cooked dinner for every evening, held in her arms every night before bed. 3 children who were her entire world, and it was because of those 3 children that she decided to leave. It was not an easy decision. It never is for anyone in her situation. Leaving an abusive relationship is not simply walking away. It is a battle against the man who had turned love into a tool of control. A battle against the fear that leaving could be even more dangerous than staying. Victoria knew that, and she still chose to leave. She packed her belongings. She contacted the police. She did everything a brave mother could do to place herself and her children somewhere safer. That is not the portrait of a victim. It is the portrait of a woman who was fighting. With everything she had, Juan Antonio Rueda did not begin with violence. No one does. They begin with attention, with questions that sound caring. Where are you? Are you home yet? Why haven't you texted me? With jealousy disguised as love, by gradually making Victoria's world smaller. Fewer friends, less freedom, less space, until she was left with only him. That is coercive control. It leaves no bruises. It does not appear in medical records. But it does something that physical violence sometimes cannot. It slowly erases a victim's sense that they have the right to exist outside the relationship. Victoria spent years inside that cycle of control. But there was one thing Rueda did not account for: her 3 children. When someone is a mother, there are moments when fear for yourself becomes smaller, and fear for your children becomes greater than everything else. That was the moment Victoria decided to leave, and that was the moment the most dangerous phase of the entire relationship began. Psychologists call this separation danger. The most dangerous time is often not when the victim remains in the relationship, but when they begin to leave it, because for a man like Rueda, love and control were the same thing. When Victoria left, she was not simply ending a relationship. She was taking away the one thing that made him feel he existed. He could not accept that. The messages began, then the phone calls, then the unannounced appearances outside her home. Every time Victoria built another wall, changing the locks, installing cameras, reporting him to the police, Rueda found another way to break through it. Not because he loved her, but because he could not tolerate losing control of her. And that is the difference that legal systems, for many years, have still not fully understood deeply enough to act in time. Victoria did not wait. The moment she decided to leave, she began doing exactly what victims of domestic abuse are always told to do. Step by step, one step at a time. As though, if she did everything correctly, the system would keep her safe. The first time she called the police, they came. They recorded the incident, then they left. The second time, the third time. The process repeated itself. She applied for a protection order. and she was granted one. On paper, Rueda was forbidden from approaching her. But a piece of paper cannot build a wall. A piece of paper cannot stop a man who has already decided that the law does not apply to him. She enrolled in Viogen. And this is an important point to understand. Viogen is not an ordinary support service. It is Spain's domestic violence risk assessment system, designed to monitor high-risk cases and coordinate between the police, the courts, and social protection agencies. In theory, it is the final safety net for people like Victoria. Her file within that system grew thicker with each passing month. 17 reports, 17 incidents recorded. 17 times the system processed the case according to procedure. And 17 times Rueda remained free. Every time the police drove away, Victoria was left alone, with new locks, new cameras, and the same old fear, the fear that this time, he would come back, and no one would arrive in time. She was not wrong. She simply did not know that she was right. There is a question that Victoria's family, and millions of people who followed this case, asked afterwards. If 17 reports were not enough for the system to act, how many would have been enough? No one has offered a satisfactory answer. And that is precisely the problem. Because Viogen did not fail through a lack of information. The system had enough data to know that Victoria was in danger, but between knowing and taking action strong enough to stop it, there was a gap with no name in any legal document. But Victoria Hart paid for that gap with her life. She did everything she could. The system did not. 29 September 2021 began like any other day. Morning, sunlight, 3 children inside the house. None of them knew that this would be the last day anything felt normal. We do not know exactly what the 1-year-old boy was doing when Rueda arrived. Perhaps he was watching television. Perhaps he was playing with his younger siblings. Perhaps he was doing his schoolwork. The ordinary things an 1-year-old does on an ordinary morning. But we do know what happened next. Rueda entered the house. What happened inside that room, we are not going to describe in detail. Not because we are avoiding the truth, but because some things do not need to be described for people to understand how devastating they were. Victoria Hart died inside the home she had tried to make safe. Inside the house where she had installed cameras for protection. After 17 reports, 17 pleas for help that had not been acted upon strongly enough, her 3 children were inside that house. And then, the 1-year-old boy did something no child of that age should ever have to do. He ran, not because anyone told him to, not because anyone guided him. At a moment when many adults would have frozen in shock, that 1-year-old boy made a decision. He ran out of the house. He knocked on a neighbor's door. He raised the alarm. He picked up the phone and called his grandmother. Pause for a moment and think about that. And 1-year-old child had just witnessed the unimaginable. And his first response was not to cry, not to curl up in fear, not to become paralyzed by shock. His first response was to act, to find adults, to do what the system should have done a long time before. He was carrying the responsibility of a grown-up, because there was no one else left to do it. When his grandmother heard his voice on the phone, she heard 3 words. Dad killed Mum. 3 words. Nothing more, nothing needed to be added. 3 words from an 1-year-old boy, who understood exactly what had happened, and who was calm enough, in the middle of unimaginable horror, to say it clearly, briefly, without getting a single word wrong. The police arrived. Rueda was arrested at the scene. But there was one thing nobody could catch. One thing nobody arrived in time to save. The childhood of the 3 children inside that house, especially the eldest boy, who grew up more in those few minutes that morning than any child should have to grow up in an entire lifetime. He did everything right. His mother did everything right. And the system still arrived too late. Rueda was later convicted. The sentence was handed down. The newspapers reported the case. Justice, in the legal sense, was carried out. But that 1-year Old boy still has to live with the 3 words he spoke that morning for the rest of his life. The trial took place in 2023. Juan Antonio Rueda stood before a Spanish court charged with murder. Prosecutors presented the case file, 17 police reports, a protection order, videogun, security cameras, and changed locks. Everything Victoria had done was read out in court as a long list of a woman who had tried to survive with everything she had. Rueda was sentenced to life imprisonment. The media reported it. Victoria's family said justice had been served. And legally speaking, it had. But there was one question that was never asked in that courtroom. If the system had worked as designed, would Victoria still be alive? Spain is not a country that lacks laws protecting victims of domestic abuse. Quite the opposite. On paper, it has one of the most progressive legal frameworks in Europe. Videogun was built for the exact purpose of preventing cases like Victoria Hart's. But good laws and effective enforcement are not the same thing. The gap between a system that records information and a system that takes strong enough action does not exist in legislation. It exists in resources, in training, in how police assess the level of danger in a 17th report compared with a first one, in the fact that a protection order can be granted, yet there may be no sufficiently strong mechanism to stop an offender from approaching the victim. Victoria did not fall through a crack in the system. She fell through a hole the system knew existed and had not yet closed. Since Victoria's case, women's rights organizations in Spain have continued to push for reforms in the way videogun assesses and classifies risk levels. Some small changes have been made. Some major discussions have begun. But in 2023, the year Rueda was convicted, Spain recorded 47 women killed as a result of domestic violence. 47 women. Each of them, in one way or another, had asked for help before it was too late. Victoria Hart's case did not end with the trial. It ended. Or rather, it continues. In the lives of 3 children growing up without their mother. In the question her eldest son may ask himself years from now, whether there was anything else he could have done, the answer is no. He did everything an 11-year-old child could possibly do. That burden does not belong to him. It never did.